the chain is as strong as its weakest link. Therefore, one is always dependent on an ideal form of society is always limited to, oddly enough, to the very concept of democracy. Where did it come from? It came from Greece. Well, not everybody. There were slaves in Greece, and it was only the citizens who could decide on these matters. Certainly not the slave classes. And so there was always social injustice at the root of all these systems. In a similar fashion, those who advocate a kind of socialistic tendency are also in error. It's not by eliminating the rich and leveling everything to a dull medium that one achieves. If one cuts up the top of the pyramid, the immediate social result in places where such experiments were attempted is a kind of morosity, and everything is equally bad for everybody. You know, not equally good, equally bad, because a form of mediocrity, because what is the point of doing anything is within human nature. If, you know, America, the American dream has one extremely positive thing, or had at least, when the various periods of my life where I've spent time in America, starting in 1962, I first came to this country and left it at the end of 63, came back in 65, had a completely different experience, and then spent many months here in 1970 and didn't come for another 10 years. In each of those periods of time, there was vastly different movements, vastly different things and shifts and social upheaval and so on and so forth. But into the early 90s, you had, in a sense, the dream of an American dream where anybody could make it somehow. There was a possibility of some sort of a material achievement of a so-called better life. As I'm not sure whether this same thing is nowadays available to the same extent, because it looks like a form of so-called political correctness, and coupled with this deplorable neo-puritanical attitude, has led to these catchphrases, such as speaking of elites in a negative sense. The elite used to be the best of something. Now there's an incredible resentment towards anybody who has managed to achieve something, and naturally, economic power also brings about various forms of abuse that are But one has to consider all these things just to see that it's very difficult to find a solution because one size doesn't fit all. And a very important point in these matters of democracy, not democracy, and all that is, as musicians, we know that if you say, well, we don't like the keys of the piano because some are lower than others, and this is unacceptable, let's tune every string to exactly the same frequency. What do you end up with? With a complete monotony without being able to play music, because music requires those contrasts, and therefore all artistry of consciousness is available in a sense to the poor. In fact, that is why in the Gnostic messages about Christ, there is that sense that it is harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than it is a camel, for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. If one thinks along those lines, one can see why that is so. Because we get to the point where the haves more want to increase their holdings, because that's human nature. One wants to have forever more, and there's an unquenchable thirst. You know, it's a bit again like the Tibetan hells, where people are terribly hungry, but their gullet they're depicted as their gullet is extremely small and their stomach is so big that they cannot possibly be filled up. In a similar fashion, it is believed that worldly achievement in any discipline, that one's purpose is to do well, to take care of families and so on. There's almost a selfish declaration of purpose, which is, again, it's hard to emancipate oneself from that, because it is, again, human nature. As it is human nature to dislike this person, to like this one, dislike that. But the wheel of ignorance is turning, and unless one can consciously, as it were, find a way to emancipate oneself from that dependent origination, it is a desperate struggle. I don't think those things are solvable on the social level. On the individual level, if one takes the reins of one's life and tries to, one decides with the proper exercise of will and discernment and the rest of it to lead the course of one's life, the chariot of one's life, then only can destiny be mastered. It cannot be done if one thinks one has a solution that applies to all. And the discernment that is required is not to proclaim humility or such things, lofty words such as service to humanity, humility, great declarations of outward declarations of good intentions. true charity begins at home. True action in any given circumstance is, if one is truly heart-centered and not doing things for an ulterior motive, then one knows when presented with a situation, one does things in a complete, as a matter of course, without any thought of that is the right thing to do. It is automatically done without without even thinking about it. Proper action is intervening and being able to help another person, but without big sound of trumpets that one is doing that.